Okay, so grounding ourselves as always in the 5 parts of every business, we've talked about value creation. So the general process of looking out into the world, finding something that you can improve for somebody, and building it in a way that makes sense, in a way that actually provides the value to somebody who wants or needs it, in a way that is not super risky for you and you can do quickly and efficiently. The second part of every business is marketing. And marketing is important in terms of review because you can create the most valuable thing on the face of the earth. So let's take something like a cure for cancer. If you are a sole mad scientist in your basement and you created a cure for cancer and nobody knows that you've done it, you're not helping anyone. So it doesn't matter how valuable what you've created is, there has to be a point where you go out into the world and you attract attention to what you've been doing, and you do that in a way that makes people more interested in learning more about what you have to offer. That's the marketing prospect. So at the beginning of the marketing process, we're starting with something that may be potentially valuable to people. We're getting people's attention, and the end result of the marketing process is a person who has raised their hands and said, yes, I'm interested in learning more about what you have. And we call that person a prospect. So marketing is the process of creating prospects where none existed before. And as we talked about earlier, marketing is not the same as sales. So sales is the process of taking a prospect and actually convincing them to give you their money. Marketing is just the creation of that prospect in the first place.
Marketing. Questions for reflection. How are you currently getting the attention of your prospects? Is what you're currently doing working, or could it be improved?
Now, there's really 2 things going on here. The first is making people aware that you exist in the first place, and the second is making them interested. So we'll talk about the first part now. So attention is the first part of the marketing process. It's the making people aware that you exist in the first place. And the most important rule of marketing is people only have so much attention to spread around. And the more demands there are on that attention, the harder it's going to be to attract it, right? So think of all of the things in your life that you could potentially pay attention to. You have your family, your friends, what's on the TV, phone calls, emails, all sorts of different things kind of competing for this very scarce resource, which is the number of minutes and the amount of focused attention you have to spend in a day. And nobody's getting any more of it. So to be noticed, you have to find a way of being more interesting or potentially more useful than everything else that exists in the world for that particular person at that particular point in time. So that insight about the limited amount of people's attention really influences a lot of the tactics that you choose on how to go about getting attention, which we'll talk about here in a minute. There's also a caveat when it comes to attention. Attention is not the end goal. Just getting a whole bunch of people to say, hey, look over here, is not going to help you. Because if everybody looks, but none of those people are potentially interested in what you have to offer, that doesn't help you. So the caveat is you're looking for attention, but you're looking for qualified attention. The attention of people who potentially care about what it is that you do. It doesn't matter how many Facebook friends you have. It doesn't matter how many Twitter followers or blog subscribers or email subscribers or whatever, unless there's a large percentage of people who are ultimately interested in what you do. So business is ultimately about making the sales and helping people. It's not about winning a popularity contest.
Attention. Questions for reflection. Whose attention are you trying to attract? What's in it for them? Why should they care?
Now, when you get someone's attention, that can either be a really easy thing to do, or it can be a very difficult thing to do. And the measure or the term that's used to describe how easy or difficult it is called receptivity. So receptivity is basically a measure of how open a person is to your message. If someone doesn't really care about what you're doing, they're just going to filter you out. They're just going to ignore you. Now, the way that you present what you're doing can influence how receptive a person is to your message or how you talk about something. And the two primary components of that are what and when. So what has to do with the content of what it is you're talking about. So Dan, can you talk a little bit about thinking about receptivity in terms of the audiences that you market to? So take somebody like United Rescue Mission. The type of person who is likely to be receptive to hearing more information about something like homelessness. How does what you do change that?
If you think about homelessness just for a second, not very exciting, and actually probably really depressing. Something you probably don't want to think about. But I have to figure out a way that I can talk to you about it and potentially bring you down a road to get you to donate it. The big thing that working with the United Rescue Mission, the largest shelter in LA, they did a lot of guilt. And we actually surveyed the whole market, and the whole market was guilt, and it was crazy. So we did a lot of talking about so how can I make you more receptive to hear what I'm going to talk to you about? I could do black and white photos that they had classically done, black and white photos of a guy on the street. What is usually referred to actually it was funny, actually the homeless marketing game, this old white guy, that's actually OWG. They actually use that as and it's the Vietnam vet with the sign. They would classically do that. So what we totally just kind of threw it on its edge, and I'll tell you the story about Michelle. She's 17, she lives with her family. Both parents are not on drugs. They just got hit pretty hard by the economy, and they live on the 5th floor at Union Rescue Mission. And I'll let her tell you her story. I won't tell it for you. I'm not going to put the sad piano music. But if I tell you this story, or I tell you the story of Kenny, 17 years old, he's the student class president of his high school, he was on the 5th floor. And for him to look straight into the camera and say, homelessness is just a speed bump on my road to being a doctor, it's like, whew, people were all of a sudden like, yes, I like what you're doing. I like what's going on. Let me okay, I'm gonna write this. And we saw huge spikes because it was all of a sudden, we just put it in a different way than you would normally have. And it only increased their bottom line by about 300%. So
Same message.
yeah.
But tweaking how it was presented made people care more. And that's kind of the what. So we'll talk about framing and how you choose what to focus on and how you craft that story. But choosing what to focus on can really, really impact how receptive people are to even just giving you a chance and listening to you in the first place. The other part is when. So there are some times when you're going to be very receptive to hearing something, and sometimes when you're really going to not be receptive to hearing something. So good personal example is I love books. I love hearing about new books that are coming out. I actively want to know when a good new book is coming out. If a publicist calls me at 3 o'clock in the morning, says, hey, I have a great new book for you, I don't care. But it's something that normally I would be extremely receptive to, but the time and place in which that publicist would be trying to get my attention just wouldn't work because of all the other things that I'm trying to do, like sleep. However, there are all sorts of things like book publicists will constantly try to get my attention via email. The worst possible place to reach me on a marketing message is in my email right now, because it's competing with about 800 other messages that are coming in every single day. So meeting a publicist at a conference who gives me a copy of the book directly in my hands, I'm going to read that book, or at least take a look at it, right? So same message presented in a different format is far more effective. So a large part of trying to figure out how to get your prospective audience's attention is trying to figure out what are they receptive to and when and where are they receptive to it. And if you can just do a little bit of thinking of that in advance, you can start to basically make sure that the time and energy you're spending in marketing is actually bearing fruit and people actually paying attention to it.
Receptivity. Questions for reflection. How, when, and where are your probable purchasers most receptive to hearing from you? How can you be present where and when people are looking for you?
Now, the next idea, also related to attention, is remarkability. So being remarkable, standing out from the background noise in some way, shape, or form, is one of the very best ways to attract attention. The reason is, neurologically, human beings are designed to notice what is different in the environment, not what is the same. So I'm not wearing them today, but Vibram 5 Fingers are a type of barefoot shoe, very thin sole. Think of it like a modern moccasin. It feels like walking barefoot. But the remarkable thing about the design is the fully articulated toes. So it looks like a sock. And it would have been really easy from a design standpoint, probably cheaper actually from a production perspective, to close those toes over. There's no technical barrier to doing that. Vibram chose to have the toes kind of stick out. And Evan, you wear these things too. What happens when you go running?
Everybody notices the shoes.
Yeah. And when they notice the shoes, what do they do? So what did you ask?
Are those for running? How comfortable are they? What do you do if you have high arches? What's the value? It was like a zillion questions.
Yeah. And by the end of the conversation, you've told them what they are, why you're wearing them, where you got them, how much they cost. And when I started wearing these, I was living in New York. And by reputation, as kind of closed off a city as the streets of New York are, I was constantly stopped by people asking about these shoes. And I probably resulted in 100 sales. Go down to 34th Street, City Sports. They're about $80, ask for this particular salesperson. And the only reason that conversation happened was a product designer at Vibram had the guts to make the toes on the shoes stick out. That was it. Going back into the value creation stuff, the shoes weren't originally designed to be running shoes or hiking shoes at all. They were designed as shoes for professional sailors so they didn't slip on the deck as they were competing. That was it. And they were very lightweight. They didn't weigh very much, but there was enough traction on them to keep them from slipping off the boat. That's how it started.
It's a pretty small market.
Super small market. Last I heard, with an extremely, almost non-existent marketing spend, Five Fingers are now approximately a $10 million segment of the parent company, Vibram, just by people noticing the shoes and asking about them. Seth Godin wrote a now very famous book called Purple Cow. And the message of Purple Cow is basically remarkability. Do something that's different from the way other people are doing it. Noticeably different. And the more noticeably different in a good way it is, the more people will notice it and pay attention to it and talk about it. Free marketing for you.
Remarkability. Questions for reflection. How can you make your offer more remarkable and attention-worthy? What could you do to make your offer stand out? Imagine an offer you consider noteworthy. What makes it stand out to you?
We're talking about getting attention. It helps to think about getting attention, whom particularly. Because as we were talking about in value creation, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to create something that every single person on the face of the earth is going to find valuable, right? It's also next to impossible to have something that everybody finds worth paying attention to. So it helps to kind of think through what is the type of person who is going to be most interested in what I have to offer. And this is an idea called a probable purchaser. Who is very likely to be into what you're doing enough that they're actually going to ultimately buy it? And a lot of your first inclinations on who your probable purchaser is going to come in your prototyping and research iteration phase. So you'll start to notice patterns in the type of person who's into what you do. And by noticing those patterns, instead of trying to attract everybody's attention, which is very difficult, it's very time-consuming, it's very expensive, you can focus in on the individuals who are most into what you're doing, and you can find ways to reach them very quickly and very efficiently. So one of the probable purchasers, at least at this moment, of personal MBA-ish related things are programmers, designers, and engineers. Because there's a felt need there of, I have some skills, but I don't know how the business side of things works. I understand that learning more about business would be very valuable, and therefore I'm looking for a way to learn this stuff quickly. So when I am thinking of writing marketing copy for personal MBA-ish type things, I have an image of Evan in my mind, or Tim in my mind, or Dan in my mind, because I know that they have characteristics that are common to the type of people who tend to be interested in what I do. And the more I focus on them, the more attention I ultimately get. Now, that's not necessarily right for all offers. So for example, the target for the book was very different than the target for the course. and the target for the online course. So this is very offer dependent. But if you can figure out the type of people who are likely to be interested in what you do, you can just focus in on serving them first. And on the small scale, it can be as simple of thinking of somebody who has already purchased or is a very strong prospect that you know is kind of your target, and just thinking of them while you're doing your marketing and your sales stuff. When you get into things like massive consumer research operations, a lot of times what you do is you take all the data that you found in the research phase and you kind of distill it to the personality of the type of person who is interested in your thing. So when I was in household cleaning products, we had a persona, her name was Wendy, and we knew all sorts of things about Wendy. We knew where she shopped, we knew what she did pretty much every day, we know what she valued. It was almost like a piece of short fiction about who Wendy is. And the benefit of doing something like that, developing some type of persona, is you can take a look at a new potential product or the marketing for one of your products, and you can just ask yourself the question, would Wendy like this? And it became much, much easier to make some very difficult decisions by knowing the type of person who is into what you do.
Probable purchaser. Questions for reflection. How would you describe your probable purchaser? Can you write or draw a profile of them?
Now, when you are marketing, what you're typically marketing is not necessarily the offer itself, because the offer is the means to something else, and that's the end result. There's a very well-worn quote by Theodore Levitt, who is a former professor at Harvard Business School. It says, people don't buy quarter-inch drills, they buy quarter-inch holes. And that is very, very true. If somebody could get, reliably quickly, a perfect size hole in their wall, they would never buy a drill. Marketing the end result is marketing to what people want to get out of doing business with you. And the more you talk about the what people are going to get by virtue of paying attention to what it is that you're talking about, the more they're going to want to do that. So, Tim, when you are talking to a client, what are the types of things that you talk about? Selling your services.
I get them to think about what life would be like if they had 10,000 people that were willing to buy what they have to sell.
Yeah, and what would that look like?
That would look like more speaking gigs for $10,000 or $20,000. That would look like I come out with a product and I can immediately sell more of them. That looks like when I do any kind of book tour or anything, I can get people to come out for it. It looks like book sales. The very fundamental thing I would help a lot of clients with is the book sales. I look at things like the prestige that goes behind that too, of like, if you have this many people and you sell this many books, you're now a New York Times bestselling author. You get to put that on everything for the rest of your life. So I always talk about that. And then once they're ready, now they just, well, how do I do that? And I'm like, well, hire me.
Yeah. What don't you talk about?
I never talk about what I do. Usually the last thing I talk about is what I do. In fact, I never answer that question. About half the people I get on the phone with, they say, so tell me what you do. And I say, well, tell me about what you're working on. And so I get them to tell me about everything they want out of life. And then I just say, I can help you do that. Because how I get there, again, barring ethical or moral things, is not the issue. They want to know, can you help me get what I want out of life? The same thing of like, people don't want money, they want what money can buy. So is it freedom, is it power, is it cars, is it whatever? So I always focus on that end result of what they get at the end of working with me. So I don't answer questions about Facebook, I don't answer questions about emails or websites until the end when I'm actually telling them what I'll do for them.
Yeah, because it's true that you're doing those things, but that's not what they're buying. They're buying the end result that they want. And I think particularly the more technically oriented you are as a person, it's easy to talk about the what it is you do part, the day-to-day nitty-gritty of your job. But to a prospect, they really could care less about that. It's what is the end result that I'm looking for? Can you help me get that? If you can help me get that, I'm going to hire you and I'm going to buy whatever it is that you have to offer.
And they'll pay 2, 3, 4, 10 times more. My company builds websites on WordPress. You can get that for $300. But my price starts at $8,000.
Yes. And the reason is you can believably sell against the end result that they are going to get.
End result. Questions for reflection. What end result are your prospects looking for? Are you focusing on what you're providing, or on the end result your customer will achieve if they purchase your offer.
Now, qualification is the idea that just like what you have to offer is not going to be interesting to a certain segment of the population, every type of customer or every customer that you could potentially have doesn't mean they are a good customer. Some customers are better than others. And this is an idea called qualification. So qualification is the process of determining whether or not a prospect is a good customer before they purchase from you. There's a really great example of this, actually one of my favorite marketing examples of all time. Insurance company, Progressive Insurance. This has been around for a long time. Progressive came out with this massive advertising campaign. Go to progressive.com, enter your information, and we will give you a quote from Progressive, as well as a quote from 3 of our competitors. Okay? Which seems insane, right? What if one of the competitors gives a better quote than Progressive does? They're losing business. Doesn't make any sense. It was remarkable, got a lot of attention for Progressive. Here's the trick. In the insurance industry, there are some people you really want to insure because they're a super low risk. You're going to make money from them. You're not going to have to pay much. And there are some customers that are going to lose your business money. And Progressive really wants to keep the good ones, and they would be perfectly happy to let the bad ones go to another insurer. So that's exactly what they do. They do a bunch of risk questions. They see who the good risks are. If it's somebody that Progressive wants to insure, they make them an offer that is very competitive and makes them highly likely to sign up for insurance. If that particular individual is not a good risk, they essentially disqualify them from being a customer and provide a referral to one of their competitors. It's brilliant. So qualification helps you to avoid wasting your time on people who aren't going to buy from you in the first place, wasting your time and energy and potentially your staff's time and energy on customers that are never ever going to be happy with what it is that you have to offer. And it's funny that you can actively encourage people to do business elsewhere, and that can be a good decision for your business. So not every person who is willing to buy your stuff is ultimately a good customer for you. Tim, I think you have a couple of examples of this as well. Customers who ended up being bad customers.
Usually the biggest qualifier I have is price. So I learned this a while ago, and it still baffles me, is that the higher I raise my prices, the better my clients are every time I raise my prices. So I continue to raise my prices just because that becomes a qualifier. They're on my website. Now I get less phone calls from people I have to weed out. But other qualifiers are how much they argue with me about things. So you get people that think they know marketing but want to hire somebody for some reason. For different reasons. Some are, well, I just don't have time or whatever. So I do a lot of talking to them. I usually do a 1 to 2 hour consultation before I send a proposal. So by the end of that, I know if they respect my opinion or if they argue with me, I won't work with them. I'm a steadfast believer in the 80-20. And so we specialize on the 20% that gets 80% of results. And if you want that extra 80%, we refer you to somebody else. So we had one client that tweaked every part of their store. We were trying to build a store for them, and it ended up being just this huge mess because they were focusing on the 80% of stuff that I think it's usually more like 90, 95, 10, 5, because it's like this stuff where really you make money by putting out a good product and marketing it correctly, and just because the sales process had the buttons over here instead of up here doesn't make as big of a difference. The big thing is trust. I've learned to ask certain types of questions and give them certain types of scenarios, and based on their response, I can tell if they're going to let me do my job or they're going to fight me on it.
There is one way to try to anticipate some of this, because some of it you just have to learn from experience. But one way of kind of backing into what likely areas are going to be is imagining the perfect ideal customer. You landed a dream client who is everything that you could ever want. What does that process and what does that relationship look like? And you can start to see things that are common threads, and you can also use a very useful problem-solving technique called inversion, which is basically take that very best client and all the things that you want that very best client relationship to look like, and take the complete and total opposite of that. And those are all of the ways that you really don't want to work.
So this would apply to the mercenary principle. Like if you're only just pursuing the bucks, you take anybody who's going to pay,
Exactly.
and they're going to make your life miserable.
Yes.
Well, not only do they make your life miserable, but then they take up so much of your time that you're actually not hanging out ahead. You're not getting all the bucks.
And Tim, what happened to your profits when you cut all the customers that weren't right for you?
Well, cutting clients that weren't right for me allowed me to focus on clients that were. I keep coming back to raising prices. I'm charging 250% more than I was this time last year.
Yeah.
And I'm getting about the same amount of clients. The other great qualifier, and this comes back to trust, is get a lot of money before you even lift a finger. I get a check for a third. If it's under $5,000, I get a half up front. If it's over $5,000, I get a third before I do anything. And again, most of the time, if a client is willing to send you a bunch of money before you have done anything, they trust you, so they're going to let you do your job, and they'll pay their bills after that. I've never had somebody not, it's been years since I've had somebody not pay their bill. Money and trust. And I'm mostly in the service. You know, I work with a lot of people that do products too. It's the same thing in products. When you don't charge enough for your product or your service, people that value it will look at your price and say, that must not be worth it, it's too cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And so people that value what they pay for will pay a higher price because they know they're getting value for it. So if you value it too little, you'll get clients that also value it too little.
We'll talk about in sales that the psychology of pricing is very interesting because price is a signal of quality and efficacy in a lot of circumstances. So you can actually get people to, as Tim was saying, respect your work more, value your work more, actually take advantage of all the things that you are providing by charging higher prices for it, even if you're doing the same thing. And it increases your profitability like nothing else, right? Because that all flows to profit. We're starting to anticipate sometimes the trickiest issues, even in the nitty-gritty business stuff, is not the mechanics of the business stuff. It's the psychology that goes into the decisions that you make and the way that you position what you have to offer. And so things like pricing, all of those things are part of what you're offering, and the way that you frame that and the way you talk about it has a major, major impact on how many people pay attention to it and how many people ultimately buy it and value it.
Qualification. Questions for reflection. What can you do to disqualify the prospects you don't want as quickly as possible? What characteristics are you looking for in your ideal customer, and how might you look for them in advance?
Similarly, a very specific type of qualification that's very important is called point of market entry, and a related concept, point of market exit. So remember when we were talking about receptivity, there are some things that people are going to be receptive to at some point in their life, but they may or may not be receptive to it right now. Classic example, and another one of these things that I had some exposure to in Procter & Gamble, was the baby and family care market, specifically diapers. Before you have a little screaming person who needs their diaper changed, you don't care about diapers at all. You can see millions of advertisements. You can see the flyers in the Sunday newspaper. You can be exposed to all sorts of messages about diapers, and you just filter it out because it is completely irrelevant. However, the moment you realize that a little person is going to be joining your life very soon, you start to care about baby products tremendously. And in the same vein, as your kids grow up, there comes a point where you just stop paying attention to that stuff because it's no longer relevant for you. The kids are potty trained, you don't need diapers, you start filtering it out again. So pretty much every market has some type of point of market entry and it has some type of point of market exit. And those points of market entry are pretty narrowly defined. So before that point, there's almost zero receptivity. After that point, there's almost zero receptivity. So whatever you can do to target the marketing that you're doing to people who you know are within those two bounds, that makes your marketing more effective. Anybody have another non-baby example of that?
Security systems to people in neighborhoods where houses were being broken into.
Yes. And even a stronger point may be the purchase of a house, period. So before you own a house, there's a whole set of things that you could really care less about because you don't have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. After you own a house, there's a reason that when you own a house in some markets, you get a care package from like Home Depot, right? Same thing happens at the hospital with babies. Because they know that that is such a clearly defined point of market entry, that's the point where the marketers decide to contact you for the first time. Because if they can establish a habit, make you interested in these things now, you're probably going to continue doing business with them for a longer period of time.
I'll have to tell you about my experience with point of entry. My first kid went to college. And so here I am arriving, I just thought, I'll pick up those last few things at Target once we get there. Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Target was ready for every parent that dropped off their kid.
Yep.
It was set up, everything was on the end caps. People were walking around with the walkie-talkies. They were literally escorting you around. And there were people with 2 baskets. And I had already gotten a bunch of stuff. And there I was with so much stuff in one huge basket. And $400 later,
Yes.
they were so ready. And that never ever entered my mind. Was it almost like an experience?
Yeah. New technique that Target has since added to that. New this year. So we are just a couple blocks from Colorado State University. On the 2 or 3 days of move-in to the dorms, Target had Target-branded buses running on a 24-hour schedule.
That is brilliant.
Yes, back and forth. Yeah.
I asked the people at Target, they said that the weekend before fall semester was their biggest time. The only single day that surpassed that was Black Friday.
Yep. I believe it. So there are certain times of year where you can expect larger volumes or smaller volumes. This has to do with whether people are interested in the first place and what you have to offer.
Point of market entry. Questions for reflection. Is there a clear point of market entry for probable purchasers in your market? If so, how can you attract the attention of these prospects as soon as they enter the market?
Now, another idea, also closely related, is called addressability. And addressability, we're still talking about getting people's attention here. Addressability is a measure of how easy it is to get in touch with people who might want what you're offering. So what we would call a highly addressable market is a market where it's easy to identify people who might be into what you're offering, and it's easy to reach them in some way, shape, or form.
Target buses.
Target buses, perfect. Highly addressable market, college students, they're all going to be concentrated in a very specific place for a certain amount of time, and we're going to make it easy for them to get on a bus and go to Target and buy a bunch of stuff and come back, right? Super addressable market. Now, a less addressable market, or a not largely non-addressable market, very difficult to reach, may be an individual who has a rare chronic health condition. There aren't a whole lot of people in a certain area. That condition may not be something that people want to self-identify with or talk about. People aren't actively gathering together in groups where it's easy to reach them. And so talking to those people individually about things that may help alleviate that condition is very difficult. However, those people may see, or probably do see, a more addressable market, which is MDs. So when you think about all of the prescription drug advertising and marketing that is done all over the world, there is some consumer advertising that is done, mostly for things that are very common like allergies and pain relievers and things like that. The very specific niche type of things, they don't try to market to the people who have the condition. They market to the MDs who treat that condition, because you can actually find a doctor and figure out where they are. So the key idea with addressability is typically the more addressable your audience is, the less time and effort and resources you're going to have to spend reaching your probable purchasers. So it's another one of those things to evaluate.
Addressability. Questions for reflection. What do you know your probable purchasers pay active attention to right now? Do your prospects naturally congregate in groups you can obtain access to in a quick and cost-effective way?
The next idea in marketing, and this is the point in marketing where some people start to get uncomfortable because we've kind of been talking the theory of marketing. Now we're getting into the practice. And this is an idea called desire. And desire is the process of making people feel like they want something. And it's so funny that marketing, at least culturally in the United States, with most people, has developed a little bit of a not so great reputation. And it's funny, the image in a lot of people's minds is the master shadowy marketers at these large companies sitting at their desk and rubbing their fingers and hypnotizing the entire world into wanting this thing that they have created, right? And the TV series Mad Men hasn't really done anything to alleviate that particular perception, right? The interesting thing from a psychology standpoint is take the largest company in the world with the largest marketing budget that has ever existed. If that company chooses to spend that money trying to get people to want something they don't care about and on some level don't already want, they will bankrupt themselves overnight. Guaranteed. You can't make people want things they don't want. What you can do is understand what people want, create something to fill that need, and encourage people to want that thing. And that's what we're talking about in terms of desire. So the very best possible outcome that we can have from the marketing process is somebody who now knows we exist, is interested, and it's like, yeah, I want that. I want more information about that. Let me see if this is something that will be right for me. And that desire, or talking in a way that is encouraging people to go down that route, there is nothing scammy, there is nothing sleazy, there is nothing wrong with doing that. That is the process of marketing, particularly if what you are marketing genuinely will make the purchasers' lives better in some way, shape, or form, right? So it's an intrinsic part of the marketing process, and the more comfortable you can be internally with doing this and the purpose behind doing this and ultimately helping the person that you're serving, the easier it is to do effective marketing that actually does make people want what you have.
Desire. Questions for reflection. Is your marketing focused on encouraging your prospects to desire what you have to offer? What can you do to inspire a visceral feeling of desire in your prospects?
Now, into a little bit more of a tactical frame of mind. If the idea is encouraging people to want what we have, how do we go about doing that? And the most effective way to help people desire what it is you have to offer is very simple. It's called visualization. So we talked a little bit about the end result. People ultimately are going to be interested in what you have because they think it's going to help them get something that they ultimately want. Now, the way to have them go down that road is to, as Tim was talking about earlier, visualize what their life would look like when they have made the decision to purchase this thing that you're offering. So really a good tangible example of this, when you are in the market for a car or a vehicle, the moment you step onto the lot, the salesperson has one and only one objective. It's to get you in a car on a test drive. Has anybody ever gone on a test drive? What happens?
Get in it and you feel like this could be mine. Wow, this feels really good.
Yeah, what do you start thinking about as you're driving this car that you don't own yet?
Well, you know, what I look like in it, what other people are going to think about me, what I could do with this vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
What it would be like to own it.
Yes, exactly. It's funny, I was reading an article about car buying psychology a couple years ago, and some people, when they're going car shopping, will take along a friend or a family member, and they want to have them see how they look sitting in the driver's seat of this particular vehicle. The most effective thing that the salesperson can do to sell that car is to get the person in the driver's seat, because once they're in the driver's seat, they start imagining what their life is going to look like when they own this thing. And then whether or not it's a purchase that they can reasonably afford, but if it becomes something that they want, instead of, I can't afford this, it starts to be a question of, how can I afford this?
Now it becomes a need. It's
No.
no longer a desire.
So I think when it comes to that, the desire and the people being uncomfortable with marketing, I think what we're really uncomfortable with is the fact that people are looking at us at how much money they can pry out of our wallet instead
Yes.
of how they can help us.
Yes.
And so I don't care how much people market to me if I genuinely feel like they're in business to make money, but by making money, they're trying to help me.
There's a story that Zig Ziglar, if anybody has ever listened to any Zig tapes, there's a story he tells in Secrets of Closing the Sale. And the way Zig frames it is your job as a seller is to be an assistant buyer on the part of the prospect. You're there to help them make the very best possible decision that they can make. And part of what being a good salesperson and a good marketer is about is really truly believing that what you're marketing and what you're selling can provide a lot of value to the people that you're selling it to. If you don't believe that, you shouldn't be selling that thing. And Zig tells a really great story. Zig was in the cookware business years and years, and there was a salesperson in his organization that was really struggling. And they were having coffee over at this guy's house one day, and Zig said, "You should get out of this business because you don't believe in what you're selling." And the salesperson objected and said, no, I think that we have the best cookware on the market. And Zig just nodded over to the stove where there was a competitive set of cookware sitting out on the stove. So I think the ethical part comes in that you need to believe in the value of what you're selling in the first place. And also, this is both an ethical consideration as well as a very practical one. If you're a car salesperson, and you are selling Cadillacs, and you're selling Cadillacs to a person who has absolutely zero financial business purchasing a Cadillac, that is A, doing a disservice to the buyer because it's going to get them in a whole lot of trouble, and it's going to be horrible business practice for you because they're not going to be able to support the payments, and that isn't a good business for you in the long run. Or recommend you out.
My favorite Zig quotes is, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
The other part is the negotiation process. So buying a car or commercial real estate or whatever, a lot of people feel taken advantage of when they strike a deal that they're originally happy with, and then they talk to somebody else who got an even better deal than they got. And the perception like, this salesperson really screwed me over in this deal and took advantage of me, which in and of itself creates market opportunities too. You see a lot of these online-only car dealerships with flat pricing, zero negotiation, that's undercutting the dealership because there's a perceived lack of trust with some traditional selling practices in cars.
And that was part of Saturn's launch position.
Yes, exactly.
I mean,
They built an entire business on that.
Not necessarily because of what Saturn did, but because of management decisions GM made in putting
Exactly.
that on.
I bought my car from a dealership that runs a traditional model, except for one guy who runs an internet sales division, that it is what it is. You can come if you like it, buy it, and you leave. And there were 5 or 6 car salesmen who were doing the traditional thing, and I was in and out within about an hour and a half and perfectly happy with my purchase and got a very good deal. And that was the 5th car that he had sold today. Wow. Instead of the 0 or 1 cars that the other guys were selling.
Visualization. Questions for reflection. Are you encouraging your prospects to visualize what their life would look like if they accepted your offer? How can you guide them to use their imagination while considering your offer?
Next idea, super important, we alluded to it earlier, which is framing. So framing is the act of emphasizing the critical details of your offer and de-emphasizing other details that are less important. This is partially pragmatic and partially just kind of the nature of reality. If we all, as we were talking, included all of the relevant details of everything all the time, we would never get anything done because a single sentence would run on into infinity. There are some things that you have to emphasize, and there are some things that you just have to leave out pragmatically. From a marketing consideration, if you're trying to make someone interested or encourage someone to desire what it is that you have to offer, there are certain benefits and certain features of what it is that you're offering that are going to be very attractive. And you want to make sure that your prospects know about those. There are also going to be certain elements that maybe aren't as important or aren't as attractive or aren't as critical to the decision that is in the process of being made. So leaving that out is the essence of framing. So Dan was talking about earlier with the Union Rescue Mission, instead of framing the traditional way, framing against a different face of homelessness. Can you talk about a little bit more of the framing that you're helping your clients do right now? Take like United Way. How would something like framing work there?
I think the big thing is, again, if we're going to say that we're competing, any client, anything you do online is competing with absolutely everything else in the whole world. It's so important that that message is, I feel, more positive. It has to be positive versus convicting. So it's so much more important that the words that you're choosing are encouraging and an invitation. Especially, most people have more time than they do money. So I can talk about volunteer opportunities well before I can talk about financial opportunities. Because for a lot of people, demographically speaking, the first test is, well, what do you do? So let me get in the mix and I'll jump in with a volunteer opportunity, because that is a donation. It's funny how many nonprofits forget about that. I'm donating my time. That's really a big deal. I'm not just writing you a check. I want to be involved. So framing things up so that you can come be involved. You can make a difference for a couple hours on an afternoon, and that makes all the difference to an after-school program, or serving somebody a meal, or giving somebody a bottle of water on Skid Row when it's over 95 degrees out. It's just an hour, but you'll feel amazing after you do that. That's just a real personal thing. And then you can talk about what's the next step on our story. And after that, that it's so important to bring about what's something that I can be involved with you in 30 seconds. Even so much as think about your barista kind of thing. You have that barista kind of time with somebody. So you get about 30 seconds to make something either this is going to be positive, this is going to be negative. What are you going to do? And so that kind of framing, if you can think in those prospects, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, so it's just choosing to emphasize the things that are going to be attractive for the type of person you're trying to attract, and leave out the things that aren't going to be attractive for the person you're not trying to attract, right? And it's important to understand that good framing can make or break the communication you have with your prospects. If you frame it well, it will work tremendously well. If you frame it poorly, you can really turn a lot of people off to what it is you do. That said, there's an ethical consideration here as well, which is you can't frame away critical issues that your prospects have a right to know about. So, for example, famous case of there was a safety issue with Tylenol. The company could have chosen to use framing to gloss over what ended up being an extremely important issue, right? A potentially dangerous issue to their customers. Using framing in that circumstance would have been well beyond ethical bounds. What they chose to do is talk about the problem, take steps to correct the problem, and use framing very intentionally in how they talked about what they were doing to make sure people knew that they were safe, that the company was taking care of them, and that everything was under control. And as a result, what could have been a brand-ending situation for them actually became a boost to their reputation, because they used framing in the right way to deal with the problem and not to try to make a problem go away quietly. So it's important to understand that we are all framing all the time. It's important when you're doing marketing to be very, very specific about how you're framing, what you choose to emphasize, and make sure you're not de-emphasizing things that are really important that should be talked about. So whether it's in Hollywood or whether you're pitching a product idea up your company or whatever, the framing of that idea is almost just as important as the idea itself. Because if you understand who you're trying to pitch to, you can understand what aspects of this idea can I emphasize so they'll be receptive to it, and what aspects should I de-emphasize because they don't care and we don't have enough time.
Framing. Questions for reflection. What particular parts of your offer are you emphasizing, and why? How can you use framing to present your offer in the best light? In the interest of honesty, are you minimizing any important details that your prospects should know?
Now, a generalizable tactic to getting lots of attention in a very short period of time is providing something free. time-tested strategy. Go to the grocery store on a Saturday. Yeah, so Sam's Club does this well, right? Sam's Club provides free lunch on Saturdays, right? Just go through the aisles and pick up all the free samples. Or you go to a website and they're offering a free white paper if you put your name and email address in. Or the insurance, so the Progressive example earlier, enter your information and we will give you a free no obligation quote on this plus all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of ways to attract attention by offering something that has value for people and doing it for free. And it's great because people love to get something that is perceived as valuable for nothing. There's an idea that was making the rounds a couple of years ago called the penny gap, which is basically if you offer something for free, lots of people are going to be really, really interested in it. But if you charge so much as 1 penny, the demand for that thing just falls off a cliff. And there was actually a famous psychological experiment around this where they would offer a person a low-quality piece of chocolate, like a Hershey Kiss for free, and they would offer a very high piece of quality chocolate, and it would be 1 cent, and almost everybody chose the Hershey, even though in practice there's a big difference between the two, and 1 cent is not that much. But just having to give something up was a barrier to people actually taking up on the trading up offer. So the wonderful thing about providing things for free is that it gives people an opportunity to see a little bit more of who you are and what your company is about and the value of what you offer before they're asked to invest anything. So that initial investment is a little bit of a barrier. If you remove the barrier, you get a lot more people in saying, okay, I'm going to check out what you do. So Tim's example earlier of talking on the phone for an hour or two with a potential client before the proposal comes out is an example of offering something valuable for free, right? His time is not cheap. But by extending that offer to meet for free, just for a little while or just once, you can increase the reputation and trust such that he gets a lot more clients than he would otherwise. Any other good examples you can think of providing things for free?
I have an example. It just shows you the value of what he gave away free and qualifying who the buyers are. Years ago, I worked in the outplacement industry, providing premier services for individuals that had been laid off. And many times they were like executives that, for whatever reason, changed in management and everything. So these were $15,000 packages that companies would buy to help transition these people and give them all kinds of training and services and what have you. And so a lot of feedback that the owner from the consulting firm was, oh, this is great. I wish I'd had this earlier in my career. You should really sell this retail. So taking that without doing the proper research, set up this huge workshop, paid for advertising time on the radio, big banners, all this paraphernalia, huge hotel in Houston. 4 people. 2 of them were former clients that were doing it in support.
Oh my.
It was unbelievable flop because he didn't qualify. Because if he'd gotten a lot of information, people say, I'll do that. Oh, you should pay for that. Because when he was giving it away, and their perception was free, they wouldn't pay $150 to come to this.
Right.
So it's the timing of it's very important, and giving away something free in the process of giving it free, qualifying it is a huge added bonus to that.
And that's a really nice segue into a really important point, which is, remember, we're trying to get attention, but we're getting attention in service of making a sale down the road. And attention in and of itself does not pay the bills. And so you can overgive your way into an unsustainable business model by, some people give away and give away and give away and never have anything to sell on the back end, or what they're selling on the back end doesn't come close to the time and energy and attention and resources that they're using to support the free stuff. So it's really important to focus on providing free value to people who are qualified customers that will then go through the back end of that channel and become a paying customer. Otherwise, waste of time.
Where does free become a bad word?
Depends on the offer. So there are some things, particularly selling to luxury markets, to very affluent customers, where free does become a barrier. Most of the time, for probably 90% of the things that are bought and sold on a regular basis, if a limited free sample can be provided at a very low cost per samplee, it almost always makes sense as an advertising or an attention-grabbing strategy. It's something that once a relationship is established, and that relationship may be established via providing something free, that continues to be a commercial relationship. It's just a little sample, or if it's a relationship-based sale, it's so you are able to develop enough trust that they're comfortable committing to an ongoing relationship type of thing.
You're giving away a lot of free stuff.
I am. And all my newsletters, all my blog posts, all the research that I've done for a very long time is free. And that leads a lot of people to the Masterclass, to the online course, to buy the book, to do all of that stuff. And making sure whatever it is that you are offering for free is representative of the quality of the thing that you get when you do the
Because
paid.
otherwise, they're not going to refer you, they're not going to be happy, they're going to try and come back and create a bunch of work for you.
Yes.
Josh, one of the ways that it seems like you do that is by using content for multiple purposes. So you'll take a piece of research that you've done and you'll turn it into a blog post, and it might show up in one of your later books. But that seems to be low incremental cost of a free item.
Yes.
There's an artisan cheese company, Kenny's Farmhouse Cheese, that's out of Kentucky. They're at farmers markets, and they use the end pieces of the cheeses that they cut as samples. So it would normally be waste.
Yeah.
Except
And
they cut it
it's
up and
very low
serve
cost,
it as
yeah.
samples. Or there's also an artisan soap manufacturer who the ends of the blocks they give away as samples. So taking waste and using that as your free sample is
Yes.
another low incremental cost.
And layering something onto the idea of free.
Free. Questions for reflection. How could you take advantage of the attention-grabbing nature of offering free value? How will you translate that attention into real prospective customers? Are you offering any free value that's not converting to paid customers? If so, what could you test or change?
So think of the worst thing that can happen when you give away something for free, which is they say, thanks for the sample, and they use it and you never see them again. Doesn't really help you. The best thing that can happen is someone sees something that you did something for free, or they take a sample, and they say, I'm interested in hearing from you again. This is an idea called permission. So permission is exactly what it sounds like. You're asking people for permission to follow up with them about additional information. So personally, a large part of my business is giving away really valuable stuff for free. It's there on the web. Anybody can read it anytime that they want. When I do that, if somebody likes it, at the very end of that piece of content or that instructional material or whatever that is, I say, if you really like this, you should sign up for my newsletter. I give away a lot of other great stuff too. You should sign up for it. That gives me permission to keep providing valuable stuff over a long period of time. So some of my very early customers for the live course, for the online course that I do, for my book definitely, were folks who had found the Personal MBA back when I started it in 2005, and it had been following the project for years before I asked them to do anything. And the reason I was able to make them an offer at that point is because I had asked them for permission to follow up. So when my book came out, I was able to send an email to 23,000 people saying, hey, I have this thing. It's a book. It's really good. If you like the stuff, you should probably pick it up. And a good many people did. So the best thing that can come from, aside from a direct sale, so if you are a company that makes jams and jellies and you're giving samples away in the supermarket and you have a display of the jams and jellies and somebody samples it and they buy one, that's the very best thing that can possibly happen, right? You made a sale from a sample. The next best thing that can happen, and something that leads to sales over a longer period of time, is asking people for permission to follow up. And you see this in all sorts of different circumstances. It could be entering your email address. It could be leave your business card in a fishbowl at our booth at a conference. It could be all sorts of different things. But that's the general principle. You're giving away something to get people's attention. You're asking them for permission to follow up. And when they grant that permission, you A, follow up with them, and B, you don't abuse the trust that they've already placed in you, right? So if I were to sell my email list to a company that specializes in Viagra spam, I would be abusing the trust that people have invested in me. But permission over time is an asset that can be used when you're launching new stuff that can help people. Good example of this, probably industry best example of this, is Seth Godin in book publishing. He has hundreds of thousands of people who read what he writes every single day, because he posts something every single day and has for the past 12 years. Gives it away for free. And all it takes is a single blog post to say, hey, I have a new book. It's on Amazon. Go check it out. And it immediately skyrockets to one of the top 10 best-selling books on Amazon. It's because Seth has earned their permission.
Permission. Questions for reflection. Are you currently asking for permission to follow up with your prospects? How are you using that permission to encourage your prospects to become paying customers?
When you are creating a message, and message being defined as some marketing thing that you want to tell folks who are into what you do about, it helps to have some short little phrase or sentence that describes the offer's primary benefit, and that's called a hook. So some very short, very punchy, attention-grabbing thing that you can say, and the only reaction you're looking for from people who hear that is like, ooh, that's interesting, that's for me, tell me more about that. Publishing, classic example. One of the reasons that this particular book has done so well is Timothy Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week. You say, I have a book that the title is 4-Hour Work Week, and people will say, ooh, I'm there. Tell me more about that, right? Because it's only 3 words, right? But deconstruct that a little bit. What benefits are implicit in those 3 words?
Life of leisure.
Yeah, life of leisure. Anything you want? Yeah. You could read into that whatever it is that you want, and all the things that you read into it are potentially really awesome, right?
The visioning of it.
Yes, exactly. So a lot of the thinking of the marketing process is trying to figure out a very short, punchy way of framing the primary benefit of what it is that you're offering. The shorter it is, the more attention-grabbing it is, the better. And it's just enough for people to stop what they're doing and say, yeah, tell me more about that, because that sounds cool. And the generalized technique is basically just the iteration cycle. So it was coming up with a bunch of different potential names, testing it and getting feedback from real people, and seeing the types of things that people signaled that they were most interested in. So this is kind of where marketing meets some of the experimental stuff we talked about in value creation. It's all the same thing. Come up with a bunch of ideas, test it with real people, see which one works. Because Tim individually is a brilliant guy. But testing ideas, whether it's a product idea or a marketing idea or whatever, coming up with a whole bunch of different things and actually getting feedback from real people, that made a brilliant guy come up with something even more brilliant.
That's
right?
the science of
That's the science of the art. That's exactly right.
Hook. Questions for reflection. Can you communicate what makes your offer uniquely valuable in a single, simple sentence? Does your hook imply a benefit and describe what your offer does?
Now, any good marketer worth their salt will make sure that when a message goes out, it contains one critically important thing that must be on everything that you do, marketing-wise, from now until the end of time. And that it contains an idea called a call to action, often abbreviated CTA. So, for example, when I put free content on personalmba.com, if I put it up there and didn't have anything for the reader to do next, that would be a wasted opportunity. It's like, hey, here's this great thing. See ya, right? Like nothing happens later. And so the most effective marketing gives you something valuable, something that's worth paying attention to in the first place, but it also gives you the very next thing that you can or should do. Usually one very discrete, very well-defined action. If you like this, sign up for my newsletter. If you liked this article, read this other one that's kind of related. If you like this, get on our email list or set up an appointment or do something that is not going away and never seeing us again. So the key for an effective call to action is to be as simple and clear and concise as possible. If you think you're being too obvious, you probably have it just about right. So if your call to action is click on the orange button to the right of this message and enter your email address, you really have to spell it out. Because if you're not very obvious about what your call to action is, there will be a certain subsegment that won't understand what you're talking about and therefore won't do it. So simple, clear, concise, and always at least one call to action for everything you do. The grand master strategy is providing something valuable and having a single call to action of what to do next. That's it. And then the longer you build a business system, the more parts you have interweaving to all of the places in the next step in the business system where you need to go. And that's it. You just build it over time.
Call to action. Questions for reflection. Are you consistently directing your prospects to take a single, clear, and simple action? If not, what action should you suggest to your prospect during each step of your sales process?
So the next idea is something that Dan does very well, which is narrative, telling a story. Human beings, cognitive development-wise, we love stories. We tend to think in stories. Even when no stories exist, we kind of make them up for ourselves. And so telling a good story is a great way to attract attention. It's a great way to present an offer. And it really just is piggybacking on the storytelling as a part of human nature. So take advantage of it to make what it is you're talking about more interesting. So Dan, do you want to elaborate on how you use story to actually get better results?
Sure. Sadly, in the nonprofit world, most times it's very bullet points. I mean, if you think about the last time you were advertised to by a nonprofit, it was probably just like, there are 47 billion children starving. And they just kind of like throw that out there and you're like, okay. It's just, you get hit with a lot of facts, like, no one has water. Bum, bum. You know, it's like, it's very fact-driven, and they don't bring it into like one thing that I think is really interesting. Charity Water is a fantastic example of a great storytelling organization because they don't tell you about all these facts, which they have them. They're there, but they're secondary. They tell you instead about all the time a village would have because they don't have to spend 6 hours a day walking to get water, and that same water that's then poisoning them and bringing all kinds of, so they tell that story and it works out so much better because there's places for us to get involved in. I mean, think about any story that we really love. I mean, if you bring it back to a Joseph Campbell kind of idea, he talks about that every story is basically the same story, and it's the hero's journey. And we love hearing that story over and over again. So tell me about Luke Skywalker and how his world changed, and then he did this, and then that happened, and what happened with Die Hard, and how, I mean, Night at the Museum is Die Hard in a museum. It's really the same story. Like it's very interesting.
Literally true.
Yeah. So it's very funny how the engagement of that story, we actually know what's, like even on a DNA level, you know, if I tell you the story of Cinderella, if I start by saying, there's this girl and she's got a great dad and her dad gets married to this woman, but she's cruel and she's got these two sisters and then he dies. And so now she's in real trouble. I'm mixing fact and opinion. And that's kind of the story. So it's way more than fact, and it's so much more important to tell more than facts because in that process we want to kind of, so what else happened? What's next? What's next? And I think the beauty piece of story just in general is I'm pulling you in. I'm bringing you on a journey. It's bringing people in so important, and what we found is that if I can do that in such an effective manner as to bring a human quality in just...
Yeah, because people start to care.
Yeah.
Even about things that they otherwise really wouldn't care about.
Truly.
So pretty much anything that you're doing from a marketing standpoint will be more effective as a story that people can visualize instead of raw statistics that people have a problem visualizing and they don't necessarily care about.
Narrative. Questions for reflection. What story are you currently presenting to your prospects? Is your story emotionally compelling and memorable? How could you improve the story you tell to your prospects?
Now, also very useful in getting attention is the idea of controversy. And controversy means publicly taking a position not everyone will agree with, approve of, or support. So constructively used, controversy is a really great tool for people to stop being apathetic about what you're doing and start at least paying enough attention to weigh in on one side or the other of a controversy. So, for example, and this was a very intentional decision on my part, I could have axed chapter 1 completely from my book, which is where I talk about the costs and benefits of MBA programs, and take a very clear position that you don't need them, they're too expensive, it's a waste of time and money, because you can learn this stuff yourself better, faster, cheaper than going to school, period, with stats to support that. I could have left that chapter out of my book completely, and the book would not have sold as well as it has. Because, and to be very clear, there are some certain caveats, like if you want to work for Bain or McKinsey, or have a job at Goldman Sachs, yeah, go to a top 15 business school. That's going to be worth it for you. But by making the controversy known and taking a clear position on it, it sparked a lot of discussion around this idea of business education that otherwise never would have existed, and nobody ever would have paid attention to it. So there's a certain amount of balance in here too. It doesn't help for you to turn your life or your business into this constant ongoing soap opera, because that can be distracting too. But being opinionated on something that matters to your market is a good thing. The people are going to see it and at least perk up enough to say, hey, I already did my degree. Who cares? There's a ton of really great information here. And they found out about it, whereas otherwise, oh, business basics? I went to business school. I don't need that. There were 22 books that I could identify as being somewhat close to being in print around this general idea of, here are all of the things that you would learn if you go to business school, in roughly the order that you would learn it in business school.
Like the MBA desk references.
Exactly. And this was coming out of my own experiences going through an undergraduate business program that was modeled after MBA programs, was sitting in managerial accounting and looking at a balance sheet and having absolutely no conception how this piece of paper relates to anything that I would ever do in the real world. And so the approach that I chose to take was, there's a bunch of fundamental stuff that you have to know about how businesses work. So let's start with the really basic stuff and get all the Legos down and build the structure up as we go. Because then, so for example, one of the things that I'm giving you is this basic financial report, which is the most complicated thing that you'll see here. We're not going to talk about this until the very end of our discussion about all of the ways that businesses work, because before then, it's not going to make any sense. But once you have the fundamentals down, you'll be able to look at something like this, and it's absolute common sense, and it's the easiest thing in the world. So that was very intentional of trying to build from the ground up. And then also, from a controversy standpoint, I do believe that business instruction as it exists in most schools, high school where it exists, undergraduate and graduate, and doctorate, is using fundamentally the wrong approach to teaching it. And so from an attention standpoint, it made sense to frame what I was offering as, it's not being done well, it's too expensive, there are better alternatives. And instead of just complaining about it, let me show you what the alternative is. And lo and behold, people actually sit down and they learn business.
Controversy. Questions for reflection. Are you attempting to avoid controversy, or are you embracing it as a valuable tool to attract attention? How can you benefit from controversy without turning your business into a soap opera?
All right, last part about marketing for now, which is reputation. And reputation, very basically defined, is what people think about you or your company or your offer. And so the stronger the reputation that you build, that confers a lot of advantages as being somebody who does good work, where your clients or customers or consumers get the end result that they're looking for, that it's reliable, that it's worth the investment of doing business with you. And the stronger your reputation, the more business starts to find you instead of you going out and trying to find business yourself, like Tim, right? What a lot of your clients are coming in from referrals right now. And that's a beautiful thing.
I get referrals from past clients, and I get referrals from links on the bottom of the websites we've done. So we get a ton of our work because people go to Dan Pink and they want to be Dan Pink, and they look down and they're like, oh, they do Dan Pink stuff. But the frustrating thing that I'm still trying to work out is you have very little control over referrals. You can create a system that brings in referrals over a long period of time, and I try to do that, but you're still waiting for customers to show up. And reputation is completely perception. My 2 first author clients were best-selling authors, and it was weird happenstance. I emailed Dan. I didn't even know who he was, really. And like, I looked him up afterwards. I was like, oh my gosh. And then he returned my email. But that alone establishes your reputation, those 2 things. So referrals are the best way. I almost never bid against anybody.
Yep.
Because people come from a referral. They trust the person that referred them. I'm about to get one client that I got referred from another client who hasn't even worked with me yet. That she's like waiting until it's time for her to work because she got referred from somebody else. So I got a referral from somebody who hasn't even hired me yet because somebody else told her and that she trusts her. So I think reputation is a combination of doing good work, getting good clients and clients that can refer, and then always putting your best foot forward because people will respect you the way that you respect yourself.
And there's a lot of things that can be done to actively cultivate a good reputation. A lot of that has to do with the quality of the work you do at the end of the day. But it's also how you choose to present yourself, how you frame what you do, how you talk about what you do, how you signal the quality of your work or your offer or your services. One of the things I think is really important to think of, and is still a semi-popular word in business today, is this whole idea of your brand or brand management. Working for P&G, which was the company that invented that process and invented the term, drives me crazy to this day. You can't manage a brand. You really can't. You don't control your brand because the word brand basically reduces to reputation, and reputation is defined by what other people think about what you do. So you can certainly influence that by how you work and whom you work with and how you present yourself and all of these things. That can make it far more likely for people to trust you and to build that reputation, but you don't control it. So pretty much any branding, personal branding, whatever variation of branding advice you come across, just reduce that to reputation. And if you do things that will increase your reputation, congratulations, you're branding. So in terms of reputation, building a good one takes time. It's not an instant thing. It takes effort. It takes thought. But building that reputation over time is building an asset that will strengthen your business forever.
Reputation. Questions for reflection. What is the current state of your reputation? Is it steadily increasing or decreasing? What can you do to improve your reputation over time?